I was pulling into my driveway after the worst day at work, dreaming of nothing more than kicking off my heels and collapsing on the couch with a glass of wine when I heard it. That sound, the deep mechanical roar that made my entire body go cold. A mini excavator. In my front yard. I slammed on the brakes so hard my seatbelt locked, and through my windshield I saw something that couldn't make sense. Carl, my stepfather, was behind the controls of that yellow beast, a disturbing smile on his face as he positioned the massive bucket directly at my fence wall. My 6-year-old half-brothers Leo and Max were standing 20 feet away in their little superhero shirts, watching like this was some kind of show their daddy was putting on for them. I barely had time to throw my car into park, barely had time to scream stop through my closed window when Carl locked eyes with me. That's when I knew. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mistake. The way he held my gaze, the way that cold smirk spread across his face, the deliberate way he revved the engine louder, drowning out my screaming. He wanted me to watch. He wanted me to see what happened when I dared to tell him no. The excavator lurched forward with a metallic shriek, and the bucket slammed into my beautiful brick wall like a wrecking ball. The sound was deafening. Catastrophic. Bricks exploded in every direction, chunks of masonry flying through the air, my wrought iron gate crumpling like aluminum foil dust, billowing up in a choking cloud that blocked out the evening sunday. I sat frozen in my driver's seat, hands still gripping the steering wheel, watching $3,000 of my hard-earned property disintegrate in seconds. Watching 5 years of swallowing my anger, biting my tongue, being the bigger person, culminate in this single act of deliberate destruction. And in that moment, as the dust began to settle and I could see Carl climbing down from that machine with the casualness of someone who'd just mowed a lawn, something inside me didn't just break. It crystallized. Sharp. Clear. Unforgiving. This was the last time Carl would ever use me, disrespect me, or set foot on my property. Because I was done being the victim in my own life story. If you're watching this and you've ever felt like someone in your life has crossed every line, disrespected every boundary, and left you picking up the pieces, please hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and drop a comment below about how you finally said enough was enough. Your story matters. Now let me take you back to the beginning, because what happened that Friday evening didn't come out of nowhere. It was the culmination of years of manipulation, disrespect, and a family dynamic so toxic it had poisoned everything I held dear. My name is Emily, and at 29 years old, I thought I had built a life I could be proud of. I bought my first home 2 years ago, a modest but beautiful property with a yard, a fence, and most importantly, peace. I worked hard for it. Every dollar of that down payment came from years of saving, years of sacrifice, years of saying no to vacations and new clothes and nights out with friends, because owning my own home meant more to me than anything else. After growing up in a household where nothing was ever truly mine, where my space was always invaded and my feelings were always secondary, owning my own home felt like freedom. It was my sanctuary. Or at least it was supposed to be. The problem started when my mom remarried Carl 5 years ago. I was 24, then already living on my own in a cramped studio apartment, working 2 jobs to make ends meet while trying to save for a house. I thought I'd be insulated from whatever chaos this new marriage might bring. I'd meet them for Sunday dinners, exchange pleasantries at holidays, and maintain a comfortable distance. That was the plan. But Carl had other ideas. Carl was a contractor, loud and brash, with an ego the size of Texas and a sense of entitlement that made my skin crawl from day one. He was one of those men who took up all the space in a room, not because he was physically large, but because his personality demanded constant attention. He'd interrupt conversations, talk over people, and had this way of making everything about him. He had 2 young sons from his first marriage, Leo and Max, who were barely 1 year old when he married my mom. Sweet babies who deserved so much better than the father they'd been given. From the moment Carl entered our family, he treated my mom's resources, her time, her home, and yes, even her daughter, as extensions of his own kingdom. My mom had been single for 8 years after my dad passed away when I was 16. She'd worked hard to build a stable life for us. She owned her home outright, had a decent retirement account, and had finally reached a place of financial security. Then Carl came along, and I watched that security start to erode almost immediately. At first, it was small things. Carl would suggest my mom loan him money for equipment for his business. "Just a temporary cash flow issue, honey. I'll pay you back with interest." My mom, desperate to be supportive, would write the check. The payback never came. Then he started using her credit cards for business expenses. "I'll pay it off at the end of the month." He never did. Within the first year of marriage, my mom's credit card debt had ballooned from $0 to $15,000, and her savings account had been drained by half. I noticed. I tried to say something, but my mom would get defensive. He's building his business, Emily. Mariage requiert sacrifice. You'll understand when you're in a committed relationship. That stung. The implication that I was too inexperienced, too single, too independent to understand what real partnership looked like. So I backed off. I told myself it was her life, her money, her choice. But then Carl started pulling me into his orbit. It started innocently enough. He'd call me up, his voice friendly and casual. Hey Emily, your mom and I have a date night planned. Could you watch the twins for a few hours? Just pop over around 6, we'll be back by 10. I'd agree because I genuinely loved Leo and Max. They were innocent in all of this, and I didn't want them to suffer because of their father's poor planning. Plus, my mom would call afterward, her voice bright with happiness. Thank you so much, sweetheart. It meant so much to Carl that you helped out. He's really trying to blend our families. But a few hours would turn into an entire evening. 6 o'clock would become 5:30, then 5 with Carl texting me, running late at a job site. Can you get there earlier? 10 o'clock would become 11, then midnight, then 1 in the morning with my mom sending apologetic texts. So sorry, honey, we ran into some friends and lost track of time. I'd be left alone with 2 crying toddlers, no food in the house for them because Carl never thought to grocery shop, and no compensation for my time. Then it escalated to entire days. Emily, I've got a big job this Saturday. Your mom's helping me with the paperwork. Can you take the boys from 8 to 6, then weekends? Emergency came up. Can you take them Friday night through Sunday? I'd rearrange my plans, cancel dates, miss friend gatherings, all because Carl couldn't be bothered to hire a proper babysitter or, God forbid, actually plan his schedule around his children's needs. And here's the thing that made it so insidious. Carl never asked. A expected. His texts weren't requests, they were notifications. Dropping the boys off at 6. Not can I drop the boys off. Just a statement of fact, as if my time, my plans, my entire life should automatically accommodate his needs. And when I'd try to push back, when I'd say, I actually have plans this weekend, he'd guilt me. Really, Emily? You can't help out your family. Your mom's been telling me how successful you are, how you're doing so well. Must be nice to have all that free time and money. Some of us are out here working hard to provide for our kids. But I guess that's a foreign concept to you. The implications were clear. I was selfish. I was privileged. I was ungrateful. And my mom would echo these sentiments in softer language. He's just stressed with work, honey. Be the bigger person. You know how hard it is for him juggling everything. We're a family now. That word, family. Carl wielded it like a weapon, and my mom would echo it, and before I knew it, I'd be apologizing, showing up at their door, taking Leo and Max for yet another weekend, while Carl did whatever the hell he wanted, and my mom played the role of supportive wife. This cycle repeated itself over and over and over. Carl would overstep. I'd push back weakly. He'd guilt me. My mom would pressure me to keep the peace. And I'd cave. Every single time I caved. The financial exploitation wasn't limited to my mom. Once Carl realized I was a reliable source of free labor, he started seeing me as a resource in other ways. He'd ask to borrow tools. First, it was simple things. A hammer. A drill. Then it was expensive equipment. A tile saw. A pneumatic nailer. Un air compresseur. I'd lend them because, again, we were family, and family helps each other, right? But the tools would come back damaged or wouldn't come back at all. When I'd ask about them, Carl would act offended. I gave that back to you weeks ago. Are you calling me a liar? Jesus, Emily, it's just a drill. I'll get you a new one. He never did. I eventually stopped lending tools, started making excuses. Oh, I don't have that anymore. I think it's broken. Carl would narrow his eyes but wouldn't push it. He'd just move on to the next request. Then he wanted to store materials in my tiny studio apartment garage space. Just for a week or two, Emily. My shop is full and I've got materials for a big job. You've got that parking spot in your building, right? You don't even have a car. It was true. I took public transit to work. So I agreed. A week turned into 3 months. My assigned parking space became Carl's personal storage unit filled with lumber bags of concrete coils of wire and rusted pipes. My neighbors complained. The building manager threatened to fine me. When I finally put my foot down and demanded he clear it out, he acted like I was the unreasonable one. Jesus, Emily, you've got all this space and you can't help out your own family. I've been meaning to move it. I've just been busy. Don't be so uptight. You've changed. You used to be so sweet and helpful. Now you're just cold. That word again? Cold. Uptight. Selfish. He had a whole vocabulary designed to make me feel guilty for having boundaries. And it worked. I'd end up helping him load his truck, apologizing for being difficult, feeling like a terrible person for wanting my own parking space back. The pattern became more obvious when I finally scraped together enough money to buy my house. It was a huge milestone for me. A 3-bedroom bungalow in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. I closed on it in March, moved in April, and by May, Carl had already scoped it out and identified new ways to exploit my resources. First, it was parking. Emily, your driveway is huge. Mind if I park my work truck there overnight? Just sometimes when I've got early morning jobs in your area. I should have said no. But I was still riding the high of homeownership, still wanting my mom to be proud of me, still wanting to prove I wasn't the selfish person Carl made me out to be. So I said yes. Just overnight turned into days. Then weeks. Then Carl wasn't just parking his truck, he was parking his trailer, his equipment, sometimes 2 or 3 vehicles at once. My driveway became his personal depot. My neighbors started complaining. One of them, Bill, the elderly man who lived next door, approached me one morning as I was leaving for work. Emily, I don't mean to be nosy, but is everything okay? There's been a lot of commercial vehicle traffic at your place. The HOA has rules about that. I felt my face flush with embarrassment. I assured Bill I'd handle it. That evening, I called Carl. You need to move your trucks. The neighbors are complaining, and apparently there are HOA rules I didn't know about. Carl laughed. Relax, Emily. Nobody actually enforces those rules. And even if they do, just tell them it's your family. What are they going to do? Call the cops. Don't be so paranoid. But they did enforce the rules. I got a formal warning letter from the HOA followed by a $50 fine. When I forwarded the letter to Carl and asked him to pay the fine since it was his vehicles that caused the issue, he exploded. You want me to pay a fine because your neighbors are nosy busybodies? Are you serious right now? Emily, I thought you were cooler than this. I thought you understood that family comes first. But I guess now that you've got your fancy house, you're too good for the rest of us. He paid the fine eventually, but not before making me feel like garbage for asking. And he didn't stop parking there. He just became more strategic about it, moving the vehicles before HOA inspection days. Then he discovered my side yard. The narrow strip of land between my house and Bill's property, about 6 feet wide and running the full length of my lot. It was technically my property, but right on the border. It was where I'd planted a small garden, some flowers and herbs, nothing elaborate, but something that made me happy. One day, I came home from work to find deep tire tracks carved through my garden, my lavender plants crushed, my tomato cages bent and broken. Carl had driven some piece of equipment through my side yard. When I called him, he was dismissive. Yeah, I had to get back to Bill's place to fix his drainage. Your side yard is the easiest access point. Don't worry about the plants, they'll grow back. You should actually thank me for flattening out that area. It was pretty uneven. I was speechless. Thank him for destroying my garden without asking. But that's exactly what Carl did. He took and somehow made you feel like you should be grateful for the privilege of being used. This pattern continued for months. Carl would use my yard as a shortcut. He'd show up unannounced and let himself into my garage because my mom had given him the code. I'd come home to find him helping himself to my tools, my electricity to charge his equipment, my water spigot to fill his coolers. Once I came home to find him in my kitchen making himself a sandwich, the twins playing unsupervised in my living room. Your mom said you wouldn't mind if we hung out here for a bit. My AC is broken and it's hot at our place. I minded so much. But every time I tried to establish a boundary, I was met with resistance, guilt, manipulation. My mom would call crying. Why are you being so mean to Carl? He's trying so hard to be a good husband and father. He's under so much stress. Can't you just be supportive? I'd feel like the villain in a story where I was supposed to be the victim. So I'd swallow my frustration. I'd let the resentment build like pressure in a sealed container. I'd tell myself that keeping the peace was more important than standing up for myself. I tried different strategies to protect my space without causing family drama. I changed my garage code and didn't give Carl the new one. So he'd text my mom asking for it and she'd give it to him because it's easier if he can help you if there's an emergency. I installed a lock on my side gate. Carl cut the lock with bolt cutters because it was a safety hazard blocking access to Bill's property in case of emergency. I stopped answering his calls. So he'd show up at my door at random times, the twins in tow, saying they happened to be in the neighborhood. Every boundary I set, Carl found a way around or through. The breaking point started building about 6 months before the wall incident. I'd started dating someone, a guy named Andrew, I'd met through work. Andrew was kind, respectful, everything Carl wasn't. I was excited about the relationship, hopeful that maybe this could go somewhere. He invited Andrew over for dinner one Friday night. I'd spent hours cleaning, cooking, making sure everything was perfect. He arrived at 7 with flowers and wine, and we were having a wonderful evening, until Carl showed up at 8:30. He didn't knock. He didn't call ahead. He used the garage code and walked right into my house through the interior door from the garage. Andrew and I were in the living room mid-conversation when Carl appeared in the doorway. "Hey, Emily, need you to watch the boys tonight. Emergency job came up." He barely glanced at Andrew, didn't acknowledge that he'd just barged into my home during what was obviously a date. I felt my face burn with humiliation. "Carl, I have company. I can't watch them tonight." Carl looked at Andrew for the first time, his expression dismissive. "This won't take long. I'll just bring them in." He turned and headed back to the garage. I followed him, my voice rising. "Carl, no. I have plans." I said no. He kept walking, opened the door to his truck, and started unbuckling the twins from their car seats. "Look, Emily, I don't have time for this. I've got a client willing to pay double for an emergency repair. This is how I feed my family. You're just having dinner. It's not that big a deal." He carried Leo inside, Max trailing behind. I stood there, frozen between fury and disbelief. Andrew appeared beside me, clearly uncomfortable. "Is everything okay?" "No. Nothing was okay." But I couldn't explain that without revealing how dysfunctional my family was, without admitting that I had no control over my own space. Carl deposited the boys on my couch, turned on my TV to a cartoon channel, and headed for the door. "They've already eaten. Should be in bed by 9. I'll be back around midnight." "Thanks, Em." And he left. Just like that. Left me standing in my own home, my date ruined, 2 children who weren't my responsibility, now my problem for the evening. Andrew stayed for another hour trying to be polite, but the mood was ruined. He left around 10 with a promise to call, but I could see in his eyes that he was already backing away. Who wants to date someone with that level of family drama? Carl didn't come back at midnight. He came back at 2 in the morning, drunk, reeking of beer, and unapologetic. Job took longer than expected. Then the guys wanted to grab a drink. You know how it is. I didn't know how it was. I knew that he'd lied, that there was no emergency job, that he'd used me as free childcare so he could go out drinking with his buddies. I told him as much. He laughed. "Oh, come on, Emily. Don't be such a prude. The boys were fine." "You're fine. Stop making everything into a big dramatic production." I asked him to leave. He did, taking the sleeping twins with him, but not before saying, "You know, Andrew seems like a nice guy, but you might want to loosen up a bit. Guys don't like uptight women." Andrew never called. I didn't blame him. After that night, something shifted in me. I started keeping a log. Every time Carl overstepped, I wrote it down. Date time, what happened, what it cost me in time, money, or emotional energy. The log grew disturbingly fast. In 1 month, Carl had used my driveway without permission 12 times, accessed my garage without asking 9 times, dumped the twins on me for babysitting on 4 occasions, totaling 23 hours, borrowed tools worth over $800 that he never returned, and cost me a relationship that had real potential. I tried to talk to my mom about it. I brought the log, thinking that seeing it in black and white would help her understand. She looked at it for maybe 30 seconds before pushing it away. "Emily, this is petty. You're keeping score. That's not what family does. Carl is going through a difficult time right now. His business is struggling, he's stressed about money, and he needs our support. Not this." She gestured at the log like it was something offensive. "You've become so cold since you bought that house. So focused on yourself. I didn't raise you to be this selfish." That conversation happened on a Tuesday. By Friday, I received an envelope in the mail. It was a bill from Carl's business. Itemized charges for property improvement services, totaling $2,500. The services listed were things like grading side yard for improved drainage and driveway maintenance and expansion, my side yard that he'd destroyed without permission, my driveway that he'd been using as his personal parking lot. He was trying to charge me for damage he'd caused and inconvenience he'd created. I called him immediately. What the hell is this? Carl's voice was calm, businesslike. It's a bill for services rendered. I've done a lot of work on your property over the past year. It's only fair that I get compensated. I've been more than generous with my time, but I need to start thinking about my business's bottom line. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Carl, I never asked you to do any of this. You destroyed my garden. You've been using my property without permission. I'm not paying this. There was a pause, and when Carl spoke again, his voice had an edge. Emily, I suggest you think very carefully about this. You pay this bill, or I'll take you to small claims court. And when I do, I'll make sure everyone knows how you've treated your family. How you've refused to help your own mother's husband. How you've turned your back on two innocent children. Think about what that will do to your relationship with your mom. Is $2,500 worth losing your mother? It was extortion. Plain and simple. But it was also effective. I couldn't afford to lose my mom, not completely. So we negotiated. I told Carl I'd pay him $500, take it or leave it. He took it. But the transaction left me feeling violated, angry, and increasingly desperate. I needed to find a way to protect myself without destroying my family. I just didn't know how. I started researching. I read articles about dealing with toxic family members. I joined online forums for people with boundary issues. I even considered going to therapy, but I was worried that a therapist would tell me to cut Carl off completely, and I wasn't ready to face the consequences of that choice. So I tried smaller interventions. I installed a new lock on my interior garage door, one that couldn't be picked. I stopped responding to Carl's texts, immediately implementing a 24-hour delay before replying. I started saying no more often, even though it made me feel sick with guilt every time. These small acts of resistance enraged Carl. He'd show up at my door demanding to know why I was being difficult. He'd call my mom, who would then call me in tears, begging me to stop punishing Carl for things that aren't his fault. The pressure was immense. But I held firm, or at least I tried to. Some days I succeeded. Other days, exhausted from work and worn down by guilt, I'd cave and let Carl have his way. It was a war of attrition, and I was losing. Then came the incident with the wall. It was October, 9 months into my campaign of quiet resistance. I'd made it clear to Carl through multiple conversations that he was no longer allowed to use my property as a shortcut to Bill's place. Bill had finally complained to me directly, showing me how Carl's heavy equipment was damaging both of our properties, creating deep ruts and killing grass. I sent Carl a formal text. You are not permitted to access Bill's property through my yard. Use the street entrance like everyone else. This is not negotiable. Carl's response was brief. Whatever you say, princess. I should have known then that he wasn't going to respect my boundary. But I'd been foolish enough to hope that maybe finally he'd listen. That Friday, I'd had a particularly brutal day at work. A client presentation had gone poorly. My boss had been in a mood. I'd skipped lunch to finish a report. All I wanted was to get home, pour a glass of wine, order takeout, and zone out in front of the TV. I pulled into my driveway at 5:30, grateful that the week was over, looking forward to 2 days of peace. That's when my phone buzzed. Carl's text. Open the gate. We're family. I stared at that message, feeling a familiar knot of dread form in my stomach. What gate? My fence didn't have a gate in the section that bordered the path to Bill's place. It was a solid wall. Then I heard it. That sound. The one that would haunt me for weeks afterward. The deep mechanical growl of diesel engine. Heavy machinery. I dropped my purse on the entryway floor and rushed to the front window. What I saw made my heart stop. Carl was sitting in the driver's seat of a mini excavator, a piece of equipment I'd never seen him use before. It was parked in my front yard tracks, already tearing up the grass I'd carefully maintained all summer. Leo and Max were standing near my fence, small and vulnerable, too close to the massive machine their father was operating. And Carl, that man who'd pushed and pushed and pushed for 5 years, was positioning the excavator's bucket directly in line with my fence wall, the beautiful brick and iron structure I'd paid $3,000 to have professionally installed just last year. My brain couldn't process what was happening. Why was there an excavator in my yard? Why were the twins here? What was Carl doing? I threw open the window and screamed. Carl, what the hell are you doing? Get that thing off my property. He looked up at me, and that's when I saw it. That smirk. That cruel, calculated, satisfied smirk that told me this wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. This was punishment for all those times I'd said no. This was him showing me who really had power in this relationship. He didn't respond to my screaming. He just revved the engine louder, drowning out my voice, and drove forward. The impact was catastrophic. The sound of metal hitting brick, the screech of iron being torn from its moorings, the explosion of masonry as bricks shattered and flew through the air. Dust billowed up in a thick cloud, obscuring everything. I couldn't see. I couldn't breathe. I just stood there at the window, my hands pressed against the glass, watching my property being destroyed in real time. When the dust started to settle, the damage was horrifying. A third of my wall, maybe 15 feet of carefully constructed brick and iron, was just gone. Reduced to rubble. The gate, the beautiful wrought iron gate I'd special ordered, was twisted beyond recognition, half buried under broken bricks. The ground where the wall had stood was torn up, deep gouges from the excavator's tracks, exposing the foundation and utility lines beneath. And in the middle of it all stood Carl, climbing down from the excavator like he'd just completed a routine job. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely unlock it, and ran outside. The scene was even worse up close. Bricks were scattered across my yard and the sidewalk. One had gone through Bill's front window. I could see him standing in his doorway, phone to his ear, probably calling the police or his insurance company. My fence, my beautiful fence that had made me feel so safe and secure, was destroyed. And Leo and Max were standing in the middle of the rubble, no longer laughing, looking scared and confused. I marched up to Carl, my whole body shaking with rage and disbelief and fear. "What did you just do?" "Carl, what the hell did you just do?" My voice cracked on the last word, but I didn't care. This wasn't just about property damage. This was about violation. This was about a man who'd been told no and decided to punish me for having boundaries. Carl brushed dust off his hands, his expression annoyed rather than apologetic, like I was the one being unreasonable. "It's just a wall, Emily. Just some old bricks. I needed access to Bill's place. I've got a drainage job back there that needs to be done before dark, and I'm not walking all the way around the block with my equipment." This was faster. He said it so casually, so matter-of-factly, like destroying someone's property was a completely reasonable solution to a minor inconvenience. Just a wall. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You just demolished $3,000 worth of property that doesn't belong to you. You're trespassing. You're destroying my home." Carl rolled his eyes. "Don't be so dramatic. It's fixable. I'll throw some mortar on it tomorrow. But right now I need you to watch the boys. I've got to finish this job." He gestured toward Leo and Max, who were now clinging to each other, clearly picking up on the tension. Something inside me crystallized in that moment. A clarity I'd never felt before. This man, this person who'd spent 5 years eroding my boundaries, exploiting my kindness, and manipulating my mother, was standing in the ruins of my property, demanding more from me. Expecting me to be grateful for his presence in my life. Expecting me to comply, to cave, to sacrifice my own needs and safety for his convenience. And I realized I was done. Completely, utterly, irreversibly done. "No," I said. My voice was quiet but firm. "Carl, I am not watching your children. You are going to take them and leave my property right now. And then I'm calling the police." Carl's expression changed from annoyed to shocked. "You're what?" "You're calling the cops. On family." Over some bricks, he took a step toward me, his voice rising. "Emily, you need to calm down. You're overreacting. It's just property. I said I'd fix it. You said a lot of things, Carl. You said you'd pay my mom back. You said you'd return my tools. You said you'd respect my space. You've been lying for 5 years and I'm done believing you." I pulled out my phone and started dialing 911 right in front of him. His eyes went wide, and for the first time in our relationship, I saw genuine fear cross his face. "What are you doing?" he demanded, reaching for my phone. I jerked it away from him, taking several steps back. "Don't you dare touch me," I said, my voice ice cold. "You've destroyed my property, you've trespassed, you're operating heavy machinery without permits in a residential area, and now you're trying to abandon your children with me against my will. That's criminal property damage, illegal operation of equipment, and child abandonment. So yes, Carl, I'm calling the police." The phone connected. 911, what's your emergency?" the dispatcher asked. I kept my eyes locked on Carl as I spoke, watching the color drain from his face. "I need police at my address immediately. My stepfather has used an excavator to deliberately destroy my property. The incident is on video. He's now attempting to abandon his 2 minor children with me and is trying to physically prevent me from calling for help." Carl's face went from pale to red in an instant. "You're insane," he shouted. "You're actually doing this. Over a goddamn wall. You know what? Fine. Fine. You want to be that person. The person who destroys her family over nothing. Go ahead, but I could see the panic in his eyes. He'd finally crossed a line he couldn't manipulate his way back across. The dispatcher was asking for details. My address, whether anyone was injured, whether the person was still on scene. I answered each question calmly, clearly, while Carl stood there, his hands balling into fists, his face contorted with rage. "You're going to regret this," he hissed. "When your mom finds out what you've done, when everyone knows what kind of person you really are, you're going to wish you'd just kept your mouth shut." But the threat didn't land the way he intended. Because in that moment, I realized I didn't care. I didn't care what my mom thought. I didn't care what relatives or neighbors or strangers thought. All I cared about was stopping this cycle of abuse and exploitation. All I cared about was protecting myself, and honestly protecting Leo and Max from growing up, thinking this behavior was acceptable. Carl must have seen something in my expression because he backed away from me. "The police are on their way," I said. "You have two choices. You can stay here and explain to them why you did this, or you can leave. But if you leave, you're taking your children with you." Carl looked at the excavator, at the rubble, at me, and then at his sons. I could see him doing the calculation. Stay and face consequences, or run, and hope this all blows over. He chose to run, but not in the way I expected. "Fine," he spat. "I'll get out of your precious perfect property. But we're not done, Emily. Not even close." He climbed back into the excavator, fired up the engine, and before I could process what was happening, he drove it forward through the gaping hole in my wall, across my carefully maintained yard, and into Bill's property. The excavator's tracks tore up more of my lawn, knocked over my mailbox, and left deep, muddy gouges in the grass. And he left Leo and Max behind. Just like that. Abandoned them in a pile of rubble and dust while he drove away to prove a point. I yelled after him, my voice hoarse. "Carl, you can't leave them here." "Carl," but the roar of the excavator engine swallowed my words. Within seconds, he disappeared around the side of Bill's house, heading toward the back property where he claimed to have this urgent drainage job. I looked down at Leo and Max. They were both crying now, scared and confused. Leo looked up at me with tear-streaked cheeks and asked, "Is Daddy mad at us?" My heart broke. These kids didn't ask for any of this. They didn't deserve a father who used them as pawns, who abandoned them when things got inconvenient, who modeled this toxic, manipulative behavior. I knelt down next to them, careful to avoid the sharp edges of broken brick, and gently took their hands. "Your daddy's not mad at you, sweetie. You two didn't do anything wrong. But we need to go inside now, okay? It's not safe out here." I guided them into my house, my mind racing. The dispatcher was still on the line, asking if I was safe. I confirmed that I was, that the immediate threat had left the property but had abandoned minor children, and gave her all the additional details she requested. She informed me that 2 units were being dispatched and should arrive within 15 minutes. I settled Leo and Max in my living room with juice boxes and crackers from my pantry. They were still scared, still confused, but at least they were safe and away from the broken glass and sharp debris outside. I turned on a cartoon to distract them, then stepped into my kitchen to continue gathering evidence while I waited for police. My doorbell camera had captured everything. I pulled up the app on my phone and watched the footage. There it was in perfect high-definition video. Carl driving the excavator into my yard without permission. Me opening the window and clearly telling him to stop. Him smirking directly at the camera. The deliberate positioning of the excavator. The impact. The destruction. My screaming. Our argument. His refusal to take responsibility. And most damningly, him driving away and leaving his children behind. I saved the video to 3 different places, my phone, the cloud, and emailed it to myself. Then I started taking photos. I documented every angle of the damage. The destroyed wall. The twisted gate. The deep gouges in my lawn. The exposed foundation. The utility lines that were now dangerously close to the surface. The brick that had gone through Bill's window. I took close-ups and wide shots, making sure to capture the full extent of Carl's destruction. Bill came over, his face grave. "Emily, I'm so sorry. I saw the whole thing. That man is dangerous. I've already called my insurance company and filed a police report. The brick that came through my window could have killed someone." He offered to give his statement to the police when they arrived to corroborate my story. I thanked him, grateful to have at least one person who saw Carl's behavior for what it really was. The police arrived at 5:53, less than 20 minutes after my initial call. 2 officers, 1 male and 1 female. The female officer introduced herself as Officer Santos. I gave them my statement, showed them the doorbell footage on my phone, walked them through the property damage, and explained about Leo and Max being abandoned. Officer Santos watched the video twice, her expression growing harder with each viewing. "Ma'am, this is clear-cut criminal property damage," she said. "The video shows deliberate destruction, not an accident. It also shows child abandonment. Those are both serious charges. We're going to issue a temporary restraining order against Carl effective immediately. If he comes back here, you call us immediately and he will be arrested." "Do you know where he is now?" I pointed in the direction of Bill's property. He said something about a drainage job in the back. The male officer, whose name tag read Kowalski, spoke into his radio calling for backup to locate Carl on a neighboring property. Then he turned to me. "Do you have a way to contact the children's mother? They can't stay here indefinitely, and with what we've just witnessed, I'm concerned about returning them to their father's custody without supervision." I nodded. "His ex-wife, Rachel. I have her number." I'd only spoken to Rachel a handful of times at family gatherings, but she'd always seemed like a reasonable person trapped in an impossible situation with Carl. I pulled up her contact and called. She answered on the second ring. "Hello. Rachel, this is Emily, Carl's stepdaughter. I'm so sorry to bother you, but there's been an incident." I quickly explained what had happened: the property damage, Carl abandoning the boys, the police presence. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and when Rachel spoke again, her voice was shaking. "That son of a bitch. He told me he had custody this weekend. He promised he'd take care of them. And now he's pulled this." She took a deep breath. "I'm coming to get them right now. I'll be there in 40 minutes. And Emily, I want that video footage. I've been trying to modify our custody arrangement for months because of crap like this, but I haven't had enough evidence. This might finally be enough to protect my boys from his negligence." I felt a surge of relief and something else. Solidarity, maybe. Or recognition. Rachel and I were both victims of Carl's manipulation, just in different ways. I promised to send her all the footage and photos, gave her my address, and assured her the boys were safe inside. Officer Santos overheard the conversation and nodded approvingly. "That's good," Santos said. "It shows you're taking appropriate steps to ensure the children's welfare. Now about this restraining order. It's temporary, effective, immediately valid for 72 hours. During that time, Carl cannot contact you, cannot come to your property, cannot come within 500 feet of you. On Monday, you'll need to go to the courthouse to file for a permanent restraining order. Given the video evidence and the witness statements, I'd say you have a strong case." Santos helped me fill out the initial paperwork while Kowalski stayed outside to photograph the scene and interview Bill. Another officer had located Carl at Bill's back property and was presumably delivering the news about the restraining order and the pending charges. I could hear raised voices in the distance, Carl's familiar bellow cutting through the evening air. But for once, his anger couldn't reach me. There was a police officer standing in my living room, official reports being filed, legal consequences taking shape. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was real. Rachel arrived at 6:35, her face pale and eyes red from crying on the drive over. She hugged Leo and Max, fiercely checking them over for injuries, even though I'd assured her they were physically fine. Then she turned to me. "Can we talk for a minute?" We stepped into my kitchen while the boys gathered their things under Officer Santos's watchful eye. "I should have done this years ago," Rachel said quietly. "Left him, I mean. Really left him, not just separated. But I kept thinking he'd change that. He'd prioritize the boys, that maybe if I just tried harder or was more understanding, he'd become the father they deserved. And while I was making excuses for him, he was out here doing this." She gestured toward the destroyed wall visible through my kitchen window. "Using equipment he probably doesn't even have proper licensing for, endangering children, destroying property. He could have killed someone today." "It's not your fault," I said. "Carl is really good at making everyone around him feel responsible for his behavior. I've spent 5 years apologizing for having boundaries. It took him literally demolishing my property for me to wake up." Rachel nodded, wiping her eyes. "I'm filing for emergency custody modification on Monday. I'm also going to request supervised visitation only. And I want you to know whatever you need from me, testimony, witness statements, whatever, I'm here. We need to protect each other from him." In that moment, I gained an unexpected ally. We exchanged contact information and I sent her all the video footage and photos. She left with Leo and Max shortly after, promising to keep me updated on the custody proceedings. As I watched her car pull away, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Grief for the boys who were caught in this mess. Anger at Carl for creating it. but also hope because maybe finally there would be real consequences for his actions. The police finished their work around 7:30. They left me with case numbers instructions for filing the permanent restraining order and business cards for code enforcement and victim services. Officer Santos lingered for a moment before leaving. "Ma'am, I've been doing this job for 12 years. I've seen situations like this escalate. You did the right thing calling us. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty about protecting yourself and those children. And if Carl contacts you, violates the restraining order, or shows up here, call 911 immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself." After they left, I stood in my quiet house looking out at the destruction in my front yard. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the rubble. I should have felt victorious. I'd finally stood up to Carl. I'd involved authorities. I'd said no and meant it. But instead I felt empty, exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried me through the last 2 hours was wearing off, and in its place came a crushing wave of grief. My phone started ringing. My mom. I stared at her name on the screen, my thumb hovering over the answer button. I knew what this call would be. I knew she'd already heard from Carl, his version of events painting himself as the victim and me as the villain. I knew she'd be calling to beg me to drop the charges, to fix this, to be the bigger person. Part of me wanted to answer, to try one more time to make her understand. But a stronger part of me, the part that had just watched 5 years of accumulated disrespect reach its inevitable conclusion, knew that nothing I said would matter. I declined the call. Within seconds, a text came through. "Emily, call me right now. We need to talk about what you've done to this family. What I'd done. Not what Carl had done. Me. I was the problem. I was the one destroying the family." I blocked her number. It hurt God. It hurt like something vital being ripped out of my chest. But I knew that if I allowed that line of communication to stay open, I'd be right back where I started, being guilted, being manipulated, being told that my very reasonable expectation of respect and boundaries was somehow unreasonable. I spent that night documenting everything. I wrote down a detailed timeline of Carl's behavior over the past 5 years. Every boundary violation, every manipulation, every time he'd used my resources without permission. Every time I'd said no and been pressured into yes. Every time my mom had sided with him against me. It was pages and pages of evidence, and seeing it all written out was horrifying. How had I tolerated this for so long? How had I convinced myself that this was normal, that this was just what family required? I called my homeowner's insurance company and filed a claim. The agent I spoke with was sympathetic but firm. "You'll need to pay your deductible, which is $1,000. We'll send an adjuster out Monday to assess the damage. In the meantime, document everything, and don't let anyone onto the property to make repairs. Even if they offer. Any work done before the adjuster sees it could complicate your claim." I thanked her and made a note to block off the damaged area with caution tape. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every sound made me jump, worried that Carl would violate the restraining order, that he'd come back to cause more damage, or to try to intimidate me into dropping the charges. I got up multiple times to check the security footage to make sure no one was in my yard. Around 3 in the morning, I finally gave up on sleep and made coffee sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop, researching property law and restraining orders and what to expect in the coming days. Saturday morning dawned gray and cold. I stood in my driveway with a roll of caution tape cordoning off the damaged section of wall. Neighbors I barely knew stopped to ask what had happened. I gave them a brief factual summary. Family dispute. It's being handled through legal channels. Some of them looked shocked. Others looked sympathetic. One older woman, Mrs. Chen from 3 houses down, touched my arm gently. "Good for you, dear. I saw that man using your property like it was his own. You have every right to protect your home." I spent the rest of Saturday organizing my evidence, making copies of everything, preparing for Monday when I'd need to file for the permanent restraining order and meet with the insurance adjuster. I also started researching contractors who could do the repair work. The wall wasn't just cosmetic, it had structural importance, supporting part of the foundation and protecting underground utility lines. This was going to be expensive and complicated. Rachel called around noon to check in. "The boys are okay. Shaken up, but okay. I took them to see their pediatrician this morning just to make sure, and she documented everything, their emotional state, the circumstances of the abandonment, all of it. It'll help with the custody case." She paused. "Carl's been blowing up my phone, leaving voicemails, sending texts. He's claiming you attacked him, that you're lying about what happened, that you're trying to destroy his relationship with his sons. But I watched the video, Emily. I saw what he did. Don't let him gaslight you. Gaslighting. That was the word I'd been looking for. That's what Carl had been doing for 5 years. Making me doubt my own perceptions, my own boundaries, my own right to basic respect. Rachel and I talked for over an hour, comparing notes, sharing stories, building a case not just in legal terms but in psychological ones. By the time we hung up, I felt less alone, more determined. Sunday brought another unwelcome development. My mom showed up. I saw her car pull up through my window camera and my heart sank. I didn't answer the door. She knocked, then rang the bell, then knocked again more insistently. Emily, I know you're in there. Open this door right now. We need to talk. Her voice was shrill, panicked. I stayed quiet, watching through the camera feed on my phone. After 5 minutes of knocking and calling, she pulled out her phone and called me. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. Emily Marie, this has gone far enough. Carl told me what really happened. You overreacted and now you're trying to ruin his life. That wall was old and needed to be replaced anyway. He was trying to help. And you called the police. On family. After everything we've done for you, you're being selfish and cruel. Call me back immediately. We're going to fix this before you do any more damage. I played the voicemail twice just to make sure I'd heard correctly. Everything Carl and my mom had done for me. What had they done exactly? Used my space without permission, exploited my time, damaged my property. And the wall was old and needed replacing. It was 14 months old. This was beyond gaslighting. This was a complete rewriting of reality. My mom stayed outside my house for another 20 minutes before finally leaving. As her car disappeared down the street, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was it. This was the moment where I had to choose. My family, such as it was, or my sanity, safety, and self-respect. Some people might have chosen differently. Might have opened that door, listened to my mom's pleas, found some way to compromise. But I'd been compromising for 5 years. I'd been the bigger person, the understanding one, the flexible one. And where had it gotten me? Standing in a house with a destroyed wall, a $1,000 insurance deductible I couldn't afford, and family members who saw me as the villain for refusing to be a doormat. Monday morning came with a mix of dread and determination. I took the day off work, citing a family emergency. My first stop was the courthouse. The permanent restraining order application was more detailed than I'd expected. I had to provide specific incidents, dates, evidence. Fortunately, I had all of it. The doorbell video, photos of the damage, witness statements from Bill, a timeline of Carl's escalating boundary violations, a statement from Rachel about the child abandonment, even phone records showing the pattern of Carl's demands and my attempts to set boundaries. The clerk who processed my application read through everything with wide eyes. Ma'am, this is one of the most well-documented cases I've seen. The video evidence alone is compelling, but combined with everything else, you have a very strong case. The hearing is scheduled for Friday at 10 a.m. The respondent, Carl, will be notified and has the right to appear and contest the order. Make sure you have all this evidence with you at the hearing. My second stop was code enforcement. I filed a formal complaint about Carl's unpermitted excavation work operation of heavy machinery in a residential zone without proper licensing and property damage to utility easements. The inspector I spoke with was immediately concerned. Operating an excavator in a residential area without permits near underground utilities is a serious safety violation. We'll need to inspect the damage and determine if there are any code violations for unsafe conditions. We'll also be investigating whether he has the proper licensing and insurance for this type of work. The inspector came out that afternoon. He took extensive photos, made measurements, and shook his head repeatedly. This is bad. The excavator struck dangerously close to a gas line. 6 inches to the left, and we could have had an explosion. The foundation damage is significant. And operating this equipment without permits or proper notifications to utility companies violates multiple city ordinances. I'm issuing citations immediately. The property owner, Carl, I assume, will be receiving notice of fines totaling approximately $8,000. If he doesn't have the proper licensing and insurance, those fines could double. $8,000. I felt a grim satisfaction. Maybe money would speak louder to Carl than common decency ever had. The insurance adjuster arrived shortly after the code enforcement inspector left. She was a middle-aged woman named Janet with 20 years of experience. She walked around the damage, took her own photos, consulted with the code inspector, and finally sat down with me at my kitchen table. Emily, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. The damage is extensive. We're looking at $3,400 minimum for proper repairs, possibly more, if we discover additional foundation or utility damage once work begins. Your deductible is $1,000, so you'll be out of pocket for that. The good news is that this is clearly malicious damage, not an accident, so there's no question about coverage. The bad news is that our payout is limited to actual repairs. Any personal distress, time off work, or consequential damages would have to be pursued through civil court against the person who caused the damage. Civil court. Another legal battle. More time, more money, more stress. But also potentially the ability to recover all of my costs, including my deductible, the hours of work I was missing, the emotional distress. Janet gave me the contact information for several reputable contractors who specialized in structural repairs and masonry work. Get at least 3 quotes. We'll need them for the claim. And Emily, I've been doing this job for 2 decades. I've seen a lot of family disputes. This is one of the worst. Please stay safe. Install better security if you can. People who do something like this once often escalate. Her words chilled me. Escalate. Carl had already destroyed my property and abandoned his children. What would escalation look like? I spent the rest of Monday researching home security systems. I found a company that could install a comprehensive setup within 48 hours, cameras, motion sensors, floodlights, a direct link to a monitoring company. It was expensive, $2,000, but my safety was worth it. I booked the installation for Wednesday. Tuesday brought a deluge of messages from extended family members. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, all suddenly very concerned about the rift in our family. The messages followed a predictable pattern. I heard there was some trouble between you and Carl. You know, families fight sometimes, but it's important to forgive and move on. Your mother is devastated. Whatever happened, is it really worth destroying your relationship with her? Carl made a mistake, but he's family. We all make mistakes. Let it go. Not one of them asked for my side of the story. Not one of them watched the video evidence. Not one of them acknowledged that Carl had committed multiple crimes and left his children in a pile of rubble. They just wanted peace, even if that peace required me to sacrifice my safety and sanity. I responded to each message with the same brief statement. Carl deliberately destroyed my property, abandoned his minor children, and violated numerous laws. This is being handled through the appropriate legal and civil channels. I'm not discussing it further. Most of them didn't respond. A few sent follow-up messages expressing disappointment in me, telling me I'd changed, that I wasn't the sweet, accommodating Emily they used to know. They were right. I had changed. I'd finally learned that being sweet and accommodating only works if the people around you have a baseline of respect and decency. When they don't, all that sweetness just makes you an easier target. Wednesday brought the security installation and contractor consultations. The security technicians were thorough, installing cameras that covered every angle of my property, motion-activated floodlights, and a system that would alert me and a monitoring company if anyone entered my yard. The lead technician, a former police officer, walked me through all the features. Anyone comes within 20 feet of your house, you'll know about it. And so will we. You've got a lot of evidence of harassment here. This system will help you document any future incidents. The contractor consultations were sobering. All 3 contractors gave estimates between $3,200 and $3,800. All 3 said the same thing. The damage was severe, the repair would take at least 2 weeks, and there were likely additional problems hidden beneath the surface that wouldn't be visible until they started work. I chose the contractor with the mid-range bid and the best references. Work would start the following Monday, assuming the insurance company approved. That evening, Rachel called with an update on her custody case. My lawyer filed the emergency modification request this morning. We have a hearing on Thursday. The evidence you provided, the video, the photos, your statement is all being submitted. My lawyer says we have a really strong case. Carl's lawyer tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, that you're vindictive and making things up, but then we sent them the video and they shut up real quick. Thursday was the custody hearing. Rachel called me afterward, her voice thick with tears, but this time they were tears of relief. We won. The judge watched the video, read the statements, and immediately granted my request. Full custody to me. Carl gets supervised visitation only 2 hours every other Saturday at a designated facility. He has to pay for the supervisor. and the judge warned him that if there are any more incidents like this, he'll lose visitation entirely. Emily, we did it. My boys are safe. I felt a rush of emotion so intense I had to sit down. We did it. Not just Rachel. We. Because I'd been brave enough to call the police to document everything, to refuse to cave to pressure and guilt. And in doing so, I'd helped protect 2 innocent children from a father who saw them as props in his power games, rather than human beings deserving of care and stability. That mattered. That mattered more than anything else that had happened in this nightmare week. Friday arrived. The permanent restraining order hearing. I dressed carefully in professional clothes, gathered all my evidence in a neat folder, and arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia, who specialized in restraining orders and family law, met me in the hallway. We'd spoken on the phone earlier in the week and she'd reviewed all my evidence. This is straightforward. The video alone is enough to get the order. Everything else is just icing. Don't let his lawyer rattle you. Answer questions honestly and directly. Carl arrived 10 minutes before the hearing with his lawyer, a tired-looking man in an ill-fitting suit. Carl looked rough. Unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, his usual swagger replaced with barely contained anger. When he saw me, his eyes narrowed, but he didn't say anything. The restraining order was still in effect, and violating it would mean immediate arrest. The hearing began. The judge, an older man with steel-gray hair and reading glasses perched on his nose, reviewed the case file. My lawyer presented the evidence methodically. The doorbell camera footage, photos of the damage, Bill's witness statement, the code enforcement citations, the police report, Rachel's custody case records showing the pattern of child endangerment. It was damning, comprehensive, undeniable. Carl's lawyer tried to present a defense. He argued that the wall was old and in poor condition, that Carl had been trying to help by removing a safety hazard. He suggested that I'd overreacted, that family disputes should be handled privately, that a restraining order was excessive. My lawyer didn't even need to object. The judge held up his hand. Counsel, I've reviewed the evidence. The doorbell footage shows the wall was in good condition before your client deliberately struck it with heavy machinery. It shows him smirking before the impact, suggesting premeditation. It shows him arguing with Miss Emily afterward and refusing to take responsibility. It also shows him abandoning 2 minor children at the scene. This wasn't an attempt to help. This was retribution for Miss Dita. Emily setting boundaries. The code enforcement report confirms multiple safety and legal violations. The custody court has already found your client's behavior endangered his children. I don't see any basis for your defense. The judge turned to Carl. Sir, you have a pattern of disrespecting boundaries, exploiting family members, and engaging in behavior that endangers others. You destroyed property worth thousands of dollars, abandoned your children, and operated dangerous equipment in a residential area without proper permits or regard for safety. The temporary restraining order is hereby made permanent. You are not to contact Miss Emily through any means. You are not to come within 500 feet of her residence, her workplace, or her person. You are ordered to pay full restitution for all damages, including the cost of repairs, Miss Emily's insurance deductible, and any associated costs. Failure to comply will result in contempt charges and possible jail time. Do you understand? Carl's jaw clenched. He nodded stiffly. Yes, Your Honor, the judge continued. Furthermore, I'm ordering a payment plan. You will pay Miss Emily $500 per month until the debt is fully satisfied. The first payment is due within 30 days. A lien will be placed on any property or assets you own to secure this judgment. He banged his gavel. We're adjourned. I walked out of that courtroom feeling lighter than I had in years. Patricia smiled at me. That went exactly as expected. You have a permanent restraining order, a payment order, and legal protection. If he violates any of this, he goes to jail. You did good, Emily. You stood up for yourself and you won. I thanked her, paid her fee, and walked to my car in a daze. It was over. The legal battle, at least the immediate one, was over. And I'd won. But the emotional battle was just beginning. That weekend, I had to face what all of this meant. My relationship with my mom was effectively over. She'd made her choice, and it wasn't me. Extended family members had shown their true colors, valuing the appearance of family unity over actual justice and safety. I was alone in a way I'd never been before, but I was also free. Free from manipulation. Free from guilt. Free from the constant erosion of my boundaries and self-worth. The following week, the contractors started work on my wall. They discovered additional damage during the excavation: cracked foundations, severed irrigation lines, damaged electrical conduit. The final repair bill came to $3,900. My insurance covered most of it, but I was still out $1,400 between my deductible and the uncovered costs. I submitted all the receipts to the court for the restitution order. Carl would be paying me back slowly, but he'd be paying. Rachel became a regular presence in my life. We'd meet for coffee, and the boys would come over occasionally to play in my backyard, carefully supervised. Leo drew me pictures. One of them showed a big, strong wall with a heart in the middle. "This is your wall that protects you," he told me solemnly. "It's strong now. Nobody can break it." Out of the mouths of babes. The wall itself became something more than just a property boundary. The contractors did beautiful work, stronger and better than the original. It stood 7 feet tall, beautiful red brick with iron accents and a gate that locked with a code that only I knew. But more than that, it represented something. My willingness to defend myself. My refusal to accept unacceptable behavior. My understanding that sometimes protecting yourself means burning bridges with people who refuse to respect you. Code enforcement followed through on their citations. Carl was fined $8,500 for multiple violations. He tried to fight it, but the evidence was overwhelming. His contractor's license was suspended for 6 months, pending safety training and insurance verification. His livelihood took a major hit. Some people might feel guilty about that. I didn't. Actions have consequences. For 5 years, Carl had acted without consequences. Now he was learning what accountability felt like. My mom never reached out to apologize or to try to understand my perspective. The silence hurt, but it was also clarifying. She'd chosen to enable an abuser rather than support her daughter. That was her choice to live with. I went to therapy finally to process the grief and anger and complex emotions around losing a parent who was still alive. My therapist helped me understand that I hadn't lost my mom. I'd simply accepted the reality of who she was, someone incapable of prioritizing my well-being over her own comfort. Months passed. The wall stood strong, a daily reminder of my strength and boundaries. The security system recorded nothing more exciting than neighborhood cats and the occasional delivery person. Carl made his monthly payments, sometimes late, always grudgingly, but he made them. Rachel's boys thrived in their new custody arrangement, becoming more confident and secure as they spent less time walking on eggshells around their father. I started dating again. This time, when I invited someone over, I wasn't worried about Carl barging in. When I made plans, I didn't have to leave room for last-minute babysitting demands. I was living my life on my terms, and it felt revolutionary. The man I was dating, James, asked me about the wall once. "It's really impressive. Did you design it yourself?" In a way, I told him. "It's not just a wall. It's a statement." He looked at me curiously, and I found myself telling him the whole story. Not on the first date, but eventually when trust had been established. And you know what? He didn't run away. He listened, he understood, and he respected the boundaries I'd fought so hard to establish. That's when I knew I'd found someone worth keeping around. 8 months after the wall came down and went back up, I was sitting on my porch one Saturday morning, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise paint my neighborhood in shades of gold and pink. My yard was immaculate. My wall stood strong. My security cameras blinked their little red lights, vigilant but unneeded. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Real, deep, unshakable peace. A car drove by and I didn't flinch. The mail truck pulled up and I didn't tense. I'd spent so long in a state of hypervigilance, always waiting for the next violation, the next demand, the next guilt trip. But slowly, painfully, I'd reclaimed my sense of safety. This was my home, my sanctuary. And no one would take that from me again. I thought about Carl sometimes. Wondered if he'd learned anything. Probably not. People like him rarely do. But that wasn't my problem anymore. He was Rachel's ex, my mom's mistake, his boy's cautionary tale. But he wasn't my burden. I'd released him from my life, and in doing so, I'd freed myself. My phone buzzed. A message from Rachel with a photo attached. It was another drawing from Leo, this one showing me standing in front of my wall with a big smile, a rainbow overhead, and yes, a little brown puppy at my feet. The message read, "He insisted I send this. Says you deserve all the rainbows now. We love you, Emily." I smiled, felt tears prick my eyes, but they were good tears. Healing tears. I texted back a heart emoji and a promise to visit soon. Then I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and let the morning sun warm my face. That wall, the one Carl destroyed and I rebuilt, it's more than just a property line. It's a testament. A reminder that sometimes protecting yourself means burning bridges with people who refuse to respect you. It means accepting that not everyone will understand or support your choices. It means standing alone until you find your tribe, the people who see your worth without needing you to prove it through endless sacrifice. No is a complete sentence. Boundaries are not negotiable. Family is not an excuse for abuse. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from people who will never see you as anything more than a resource to exploit. I rebuilt my wall. But more importantly, I rebuilt myself. And that is worth more than any amount of brick and mortar. Have you ever had to make the hard choice to cut off someone who kept crossing your boundaries? How did you know it was time? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. This community is here for you, and your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe so we can keep sharing these real, raw experiences together. Remember, standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. And you deserve to feel safe in your own life.